This episode is brought to you by AMC and AMC Plus, presenting Season 2 of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. Hailed as one of the best TV shows of the decade by the Chicago Tribune. Executive produced by award-winning producer Mark Johnson, creator and showrunner Roland Jones and Mark Taylor, along with Christopher Rice and the late Anne Rice. For your consideration, go to amcfyc.com for more.
Rupert Murdoch famously said to Tom Rothman, "If the fortunes of my company and a $500 million investment ever fall to the opinion of a bunch of fat kids in Texas again, you're fucking fired." And yeah, I understand why we were a real burr in the saddle for these people. Like, it truly was out of their hands. And I think that was an experience none of them had ever had before.
Welcome back to Hollywood Stories, Tales from the 1990s, presented by Ankler Media. This is our fourth episode. Last week, we heard about life at the very peak of Hollywood during this era from our very special guest, the legendary Ron Meyer. If you haven't listened to that, go back and enjoy that conversation and all our chats in this series. And I want to thank you. The response to this series has been really amazing. The 90s is such a magical era for those of us who lived through it. And it just seems so distant and foreign to our world today in Hollywood. And I'm glad we've been able to untap so much of that nostalgia. This week, we're going to hear about the grassroots revolution that really did change everything, for a while anyway. Today, I'm speaking with Drew McQueenie, who, as much as Ron Meyer is a legend at the pinnacle of Hollywood, was truly a legend at the grassroots and among film fans. Drew, much like Quentin Tarantino, was one of these film savants who found work in a video store surrounded by the archives of film history. And from there, he became this underground force, commenting on and eventually shaping the course of film history himself, first on independent message boards, and then on what was one of the very first websites in all of the internet to feature actual reporting, Ain't It Cool News. There, under the nom de guerre Moriarty, his inside scoops put the trades to shame and shook up that cozy insular world, and his astute commentary garnered him a legion of fans who follow him today, writing under his own name, Drew McQueenie, as a film critic, blogger, podcaster, and a great man of the cinema. I should also add that Drew is a good friend and a former colleague. We worked together at the late great HitFix website where he served as a film critic. And so now, without any further ado, I'll get out of the way here and please enjoy our conversation with Drew McQueenie. Welcome, Drew McQueenie, old friend whose work I've been following since the 90s, far before I knew you, and so glad to have you here on Hollywood Stories.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Richard. Very nice to see you.
It's very nice to see you, too. Drew and I communicate often, but rarely with visuals, so it's almost like being together.
There you go.
Tell me, when the 90s dawned, where was young Drew McQueenie?
Literally the first half of that year, I was still in Florida, and I was working to save money, and the idea was probably 91, 92, move out here. And then Jim Henson died. And when Jim Henson died, it rocked me. I thought he was going to be alive forever. I truly thought he had another 40 years in him. It blew my mind. And the idea that it was just walking pneumonia and something stupid, like he just didn't get a doctor to check him in time, like it just crazy to me. And I think a week later we were in a car. I quit the jobs I was working. I took the money I had and I was like, I'm going to LA, man. I can't, like, if Jim Henson can drop dead, anything can happen at any point. I can't wait.
There's not a moment to lose.
Literally, I remember working at the theater that I worked at right until the day before we left, went to an employee screening of Dick Tracy, so it hadn't opened yet, got in the car, and by the time we drove to LA, it was open.
Wow.
So It was that weekend. It was like right around Dick Tracy, whenever that was.
Did you know people here?
Nope, not a person.
How did you just come to LA and get set up? I'm always amazed when people can do that.
I had my co-writer who I had worked with in high school. We had worked on a TV show at our high school. Our school had a closed circuit system. So every room had a TV, and there was a TV studio they had built. When we got there, they weren't using it. They basically were showing movies to the classrooms. They would put something in the central, so it was not being used. And we pitched the school a morning show and ended up doing a morning show every day live for 3.5 years, and then a taped half of it. So, and then the person that I worked with, Scott Swan at the time, Rebecca Swan now, we immediately clicked and started working together and writing together. And so a couple of years after high school, we just packed up together and drove out. Literally, there's a photo of the two of us leaving at like 3 a.m. with a packed car, and we look like babies. We look like little children. I cannot imagine anybody let us drive across a country, much less just move somewhere. But yeah, that's what we did. And it was crazy.
In the 90s, they let babies do things.
Yes.
You could be 12 years old and they'd let you steal a car and go on a crime spree. But tell me about getting settled in L.A. and what your goals were and how it all went for you.
I knew I wanted to write and direct, and I knew that it was, this was the age of like the giant spec sales. And so I had a very definite picture of what the business looked like. And of course, that had nothing to do with how we ended up getting in. I started working at movie theaters and at a Laserdisc store, which was at the time one of 3, I think, in the city. And so we had tons of industry people that came to the store. Basically, anybody that worked in the business came in and bought them.
Laserdiscs, for those who don't remember, was the very high-end version of home video then.
It was the first time they did letterboxing for almost everything, and it was a real geek format. And so all the people that came into our store were either hardcore movie geeks or people who made movies. And I met everyone when I worked there and when I worked at the theater, because I did trade screenings and test screenings. So I had to constantly, and as a manager, that meant I constantly was in contact with the people that came in to test screen things. I met Jeffrey Katzenberg very early. I had to deal with all the directors that came in. I had to babysit Woody Allen one night during a screening of Scenes from a Mall. Like, I had some weird first experiences, and at that point had basically met no one. So I went from, I live in Florida, I've never met anybody who worked in the film business, to, oh my God, every day I'm basically working with 3 or 4 people that I recognize and have grown up watching.
Where was the store?
The Laserdisc store was in Sherman Oaks, and the theater that I worked with was the General Cinema Sherman Oaks. And so it was very centrally located, and literally we did 3 or 4 test screenings a week. So constantly people were there that we knew and recognized. And yeah, little by little, I just started meeting people. I started talking to people. I became the guy at the video store who, in the pre-IMDb days, I was the dude who somebody would come in and go, I need something, blah, blah, blah. And they would describe it and they go, I don't know, ask that guy. And Ask That Guy became how I met everybody. I remember an actor came in one night. He had a script with him for an audition he was doing, and the front page of the script, after the title page, was just a list of influences, things this guy, the writer-director, liked. And this actor came in and he's like, I don't know any of this. Please find one example from every name on this list. So he did. I went through and I pulled rentals for everything, gave them the stack of stuff. They went away, they did the audition, they didn't get the job. They came back and gave me the script. They were like, if you want to read it, here you go. And it was Reservoir Dogs.
Wow.
And it was my first glimpse at Tarantino's brain. And I just remember reading that list of things and going, I like this list. I want to know who this dude is. So there was a lot of that, like a lot of ways I ran into people and got to know people through that store. And then as soon as I left, I just basically had built enough community to start working.
There's something about that time, like I've thought of you and Quentin Tarantino in the same breath as like these sort of analog era video guys who are able to, within your brains, hold all the knowledge of the film world.
I mean, thinking about it now, we're at about 128 years, 29 years of cinema at this point, and I'm 54. So like, I basically came in halfway through the story and just started memorizing. And I do think I have the advantage of having grown up in the 70s and the 80s and having to learn all this stuff for myself and not have had constant access to something in my pocket that told me these things. I had to internalize it. That was the only way I was going to learn all this stuff and be able to know it. And it was definitely very helpful. For a long time, I would meet somebody and I could pull up the weirdest credit in their resume as the thing that I liked and start talking to them about it. And that made such a difference because you weren't talking to them about the thing that everybody else talked to them about. Yeah. And people love that. People love when you bring up the weirdest thing on their resume or the most personal little thing, and that's what you want to talk. It was such a great way in.
Particularly in those days when there was no IMDb and you couldn't look up a thing, when there were no fan boards or anything to actually know that information.
Yeah.
That must have, I know for a fact you forged great bonds with a great many filmmakers who did that. But then along came this thing called the internet.
Yep.
How did that rear its head? And tell me your experience.
It was one of those things we kind of resisted at first. I mean, we didn't even have a computer or a typewriter in the house for the longest time. Swan I would write everything out by longhand while we were talking and working through scripts. And so all of our scripts exist in notebooks just as longhand first. And then he would type everything. And he had like an electric typewriter that you could store something in sort of as a file. It was the craziest way to work. And we would have to do the manual corrections of pages and secondary pages. Crazy to me to look at how long we did that. And it was really after we joined the guild in 94, I think, 94, 95. And then it was about a year after that we went ahead and bought our first computer. And it was I had a 540 megabyte hard drive. Like, it was so tiny as a computer that I can't believe we used that for a while and then got online with that. And I just remember finding news groups. That was the first thing I really found that I liked. And just realizing, oh my God, there's a lot of weirdos out here who want to argue about whether or not Harrison Ford's a robot in Blade Runner. I found my people. Here we go.
This was the first time, other than like fanzines or at conventions, that people could connect with each other.
There are people that I know today who I met in those news group days, some of whom I've worked with, some of whom I've just been friendly with all that time. And it's wild how a lot of the shape of the internet that still exists asserted itself in those early days. You saw all the patterns that still play out. You saw
what sort of things?
You saw the people that were just there to troll. You saw the people that were there to have sincere conversations. You saw the people who were there to stir shit and just see what would happen. It was all the personality clashes that have defined social media and the social media age played out there as well. There are people who probably still don't talk to me because of those early news group days. And yeah, I found it really interesting as a place to go and kind of vent about movies. And that was the first place I ran across Harry Knowles, was in a news group. And I remember arguing with him intensely and hating him on first sight.
So tell me about Harry. Who was Harry, for those who don't know?
Harry Knowles was the creator of Ain't It Cool News. He was the founder of the site. And it resulted from an accident he had that immobilized him. And basically the internet was his only way to connect to the world for a while he was recovering. His big innovation, the first thing that Harry did, and to say this today, like everybody's like, well, yeah, that's the way the internet worked, but it didn't. Nobody did it yet. Harry was an aggregator. Harry was the first guy that went to all these news groups where people were posting things. People were saying, oh, I worked on this movie and blah, blah, blah happened. And Harry was the first person to take all those little things that he found online and put them somewhere.
It made it accessible to, I would put myself in this world, a level of people who were nerds, but not sort of full-time nerds.
Yeah.
To get through those news groups, first of all, they loaded very quickly, and like trying to figure out what people were talking about and like sort through the threads was
chaos. Yeah.
So if you weren't ready to devote yourself sort of full-time to that, having sites that could come along and be sort of your guide to that was immensely valuable.
It was. And Harry was smart enough to start following up with people that had posted in news groups and say, hey, I know this, you know this. If I put these two things together, can you confirm that? So he started cultivating sources and building a list of names that he could reach out to. Oh, this person works for an effects house. Oh, this person works for this. This person's a gaffer. One of the things that has served me very well during the internet age, and it was something that I did naturally from the moment I moved to town, was I treat everybody on a film crew the same way. I don't care what the position is. If you're working on a film crew, I find that fascinating. Any position, any job, I find interesting, and I find the work that you do interesting. And so our big network of spies in the early days were all the people that nobody ever talked to. They were all the people that felt powerless and ignored and invisible. And the internet gave them a place to have a voice. And then we gave them a place to kind of centralize that voice.
So you started collecting the rumors that were out there on the news boards. What sort of things were you posting?
The way I met Harry was he would post anything, any rumor he heard. And in the early days, when I knew something wasn't right and it was online, I couldn't help but correct it. I'm that guy, just deeply ingrained in my body. I'm that guy. And so a lot of my early encounters with Harry were emails where I said, well, that's not right. That's not correct. That's not true. And I was so antagonistic about it that little by little, he started to say, well, if you know this, why don't you just tell me what's correct? And that urge of mine kicked in, and I couldn't help but correct information and then eventually offer information. And then next thing I knew, I was writing for his site.
So tell me about that leap and tell me about your nom de internet there.
Well, it was because I think I was such a prick to him for so long that he finally named me Moriarty, as in Sherlock Holmes' great nemesis, as the pain in his ass, the ultimate thorn in the side. And that's what I was to him in the early days. And I started contributing things that I was excited by. Really, the way I viewed it in the early days was it was a chance to advocate for stuff that I didn't think was going to make it through the process.
Do you remember some of your early causes that you championed?
I remember just early screenplays I really liked. I remember in the early days of this would have been like 97, 98. There was a dude that I kept reading, and he really hadn't made a film yet, hadn't broken through, but his scripts were bouncing around town. And every time I read one of them, I got so excited because this guy had nothing on the page. The most stripped down scene descriptions I'd ever read, the sparest dialogue I'd ever seen. They looked like haiku on the page, almost nothing on the page. And I spent 2 years saying, I don't know who this guy is. I've never met him. This guy's amazing. When he starts making these movies, it's going to break everything. It was M. Night Shyamalan. And I remember a year or more out reading Sixth Sense and being like, on the page, this is insane how good this is and how streamlined it is. And I really started advocating for this guy is a major voice. He had a script called Labor of Love, which is still one of the few things he hasn't produced, that was about a guy whose wife died. And as a gesture, he decides to walk across the country. And it's the story of him doing that and everybody trying to figure out why he's doing it, what it means. And it's just this gesture. And again, one of those screenplays that I read and passed out to everybody, like anybody that was interested, I would hand it to and be like, you got to read this. You got to read this. And so that's what a lot of it was. It was advocacy. It was like, these are the things that are exciting to me. I hope the business treats this guy well and makes his movie. I hope he gets through the process. And I think that was a big part of what made me want to do this, was seeing it start to actually get through to people. And it was when Hollywood treated us like we mattered. They made the mistake of, in print, giving us power. And the moment they did that, they screwed themselves because we were nobody.
How did that happen?
I believe it was Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin was test screening. And again, part of what we did was disrupted a process that had been totally secret up until that point. And when I moved to LA and worked test screenings as a theater manager, I saw repeatedly how disrespectful the process was to the artists.
I worked test screenings too as a young...
Horrible. And I get why filmmakers get hives when they talk about it, because it's not for them. It's for the studio and for the marketing department. Yeah. They say the test screenings are for the filmmaker to fine-tune his movie. 90% of the time, that's bullshit. The studio just wants to know what they're selling, and then they want to smooth out anything that prevents them from selling it to the most people. That's what they were for. And I would watch them mislead filmmakers. The one that broke me was Jimmy Hollywood, where Barry Levinson came in, did the test screening, and it was a disaster. It was a bad movie, and it played terribly in that rough early form. Just a nightmare of a movie. And he told them at the beginning, he said, I don't want to do numbers today. I know the movie's not ready. I don't want to do numbers. And they were like, okay, that's fine. No numbers. And he said, so I don't want to hand out forms. I'm just going to stand in the back of the theater, listen to them. I'll know if the movie's working. I'll know if the laughs are landing. And at the end, I want to talk to them for 5 minutes and then I'll leave. And that's it. And they said, perfect. So they did that. He stood in the back. He listened. At the end of the movie, he came out. He talked to the test audience that was there for 10 minutes maybe. And then he said, that's it. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. And then he left. And they held the audience there. And as soon as he was out of the parking lot, they handed out the cards. They got all the numbers that they wanted. They did everything they told him they weren't going to do. They ran a focus group. They destroyed the film. And I remember watching it and thinking, well, Levinson doesn't know that happened. He doesn't even know this is going on now. That can't be good for the filmmaker. And so I went to a ton of test screenings when I first moved to town. I got into that system. I had friends that handed the passes out so I could get into anything I wanted to see. And when Ain't It Cool began, one of the things that we did was totally verboten and utterly not done in the industry anywhere was we reviewed test screenings. We talked about movies we saw.
This is where I recall that Ain't It Cool really came to the attention of official Hollywood in a big way.
It was Batman and Robin that did it because Batman and Robin was so expensive and Warner Brothers knew they had a problem. And so they were really struggling with it. And we ran reviews of a test screening where somebody, one of our spies, yelled the phrase "death to Schumacher" during the screening and got a big laugh. And several people wrote in and reported the same thing. Oh my God, there was a dude who yelled "death to Schumacher." And then that guy wrote in and was like, oh, that was me, 100%. And so we ran all those the next morning. And Chris Pula was the head of marketing at Warner Brothers at the time. And Chris Pula went to Entertainment Weekly and proceeded to bitch about us in detail, at length, about how we were ruining Hollywood and the product and getting in the middle of it. And we should not. He could not have endorsed us any more heartily if he had tried. He utterly put us on the map and made us famous overnight and gave us power.
Suddenly everybody's like, wait, who's this that's ruining Hollywood?
What? If I'm ruining Hollywood, I must have power, which is an insane thing to do. He empowered us to then become his enemies. And yeah, we did. We became a real problem for them for a while.
This episode is brought to you by AMC and AMC Plus, presenting Season 2 of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. Hailed as one of the best TV shows of the decade by the Chicago Tribune. Executive produced by award-winning producer Mark Johnson, creator and showrunner Roland Jones and Mark Taylor, along with Christopher Rice and the late Anne Rice. For your consideration, go to amcfyc.com for more. So how did that change things when you started to get attention then, and you started, and official Hollywood was suddenly watching?
I really wrestled with it at first because I was working. I was already working. I'd been in the guild for several years at that point and was, doing plays and developing screenplay. I'd been working for a while. I needed the anonymity. I was like, I can't put my name on any of this. But I'll admit, in your 20s, when you are struggling to break in and all of a sudden you have a platform that people are listening to and that you can affect actual change with, you're going to lean in. And I did.
I mean, the idea that in your 20s, like if anyone wants to look at your writing anywhere, you're just like, oh my God.
It was a heady time. And it really felt like we were actually doing things. I would hear from filmmakers that you were brought up in meetings, that this happened, that they won't move until you guys have said that you like something. Like it started to actually impact what was getting made and how. And one of the weirdest parts of that now is kind of looking at the landscape, seeing how what we did altered the landscape, and having real regrets about having altered the landscape the way we did. I really feel like they listened to us, but they took all the worst parts of what we said and none of the good part. And so what we have now is our monkey's paw situation, where it's the industry we were asking for, but just one part of it very loud and nothing else anymore.
And what is that part?
It was a huge thing for us that comic books were legitimate source material that needed to be treated seriously and with respect like any other source material.
And this was, in the 90s, just to set the table here, comic book-based movies there was no Marvel. It was sporadic, piecemeal things that were mostly failures.
Batman in '89 was obviously a mega blockbuster and changed the way people thought about comic books. But didn't change the executives that were greenlighting things. And so they didn't get it. They didn't understand any of what they were. Their first impulse after Batman became a hit was to chase pulp heroes. That's why you got the Shadow and the Phantom and a whole bunch of pulp stuff that had nothing to do with what people liked and really wasn't the thing they were asking for.
So they saw Batman and they said, oh, people like noir.
Yeah. Oh, we'll do the Shadow. No, they're very different. And I don't think you got what people loved about Batman, which was the world and Tim Burton's insane vision for it. And so the 90s were a really weird, rough time of watching Hollywood flirt with comic books. But as soon as they would buy them, they would gut them and they would change everything. And our point over and over was, there's a reason there's an audience for those things. The audience loves the things they are. When you run from that, you piss that audience off and you're not making it for the other audience. So you're not doing anything for anybody. Treat the source material seriously. And those early days, some of the stuff that we were covering heavily was like X-Men, which was winding its way through the development process. And Fox was freaked out by it. Fox was freaked out by it all the way through shooting. They cut the budget at, the midpoint of the shoot, and they lost their nerve and made them, double down with Matrix-style black leather because they were so scared of the way they looked. And, they did everything they could to basically kill that film while it was being made. And the whole time, we were writing editorials just saying, this is your Bond. There's 25 movies here. Easily. Do this right, and you can make X-Men movies for the rest of your lives. And there's 50 characters you can make individual movies about. You can do, we said all this to them in print repeatedly. And we started hearing back from people working on the film, like Tom DeSanto and people close to Bryan Singer, that they were listening and that they were trying and that it was a real battle at the studio level. And so it felt like for us, we were on the filmmaker side and we were rarely on the studio side. Let me tell you, that is not a winning business model for somebody who is trying to work in this business as a screenwriter.
What was the fallout for that?
I was okay for a long time. I was anonymous for a long time. I was Moriarty for years. And I finally got demasked in public. Somebody published my name and published who I was. And I had to lean in and say, yes, that is actually me. I played that balance for a little while. There were studio jobs I got after that where people kind of liked the idea that they were hiring Moriarty and they had that, pipeline into that process. And there were people that would not even meet with me. But it really burned things down after I wrote an editorial about Tom Rothman. I had 2 films in development at Fox at the time. Not smart, not good math.
You published it as Moriarty
I published it as Moriarty, but they knew exactly who it was, and they fired me from both films within the week.
What did your editorial say?
I went to the Saturns that year, and Tom Rothman came to get an award for Friend of the Genre, which I found despicable because I knew every filmmaker he'd worked with, and genre filmmakers had the hardest time with him. I'm in a weird place now because I do think Tom Rothman is one of the few people in this business who is still pushing theatrical motion pictures as the model for his studio. I got to respect that. And I do think in his heart of hearts, I think Tom is trying to defend the theatrical experience. I don't feel quite as passionately about Rothman as I do. I still think he's a man of very different tastes than me. And that was my biggest thing as a young person was if you didn't share my taste, you were wrong.
Your taste is a moral crusade when you're in your 20s.
Exactly. And boy, that did me no favors. And so I went to the Saturns. He gave a speech and I wrote about the speech. And I said some very intemperate things writing about the speech. Not inaccurate, intemperate. And the way I said them got so far under his skin that he made calls the next morning. And I just started to feel the ripple effect immediately. It's one thing if that's me as a writer. I have a lot of guilt for what happened to my writing partner because Rebecca was not part of Ain't It Cool, really, and just took shrapnel from my side career that landed on her writing career as much as mine. So it definitely was one of those things where that was the moment that I finally realized I can't really work both sides of the street. I can't.
Just to take a step back, you say you have regrets about the legacy of Ain't It Cool, but looking at the landscape of journalism covering Hollywood before Ain't It Cool, there was a reason why there was such a hunger for this.
There was, yeah. It was an interesting time for media magazines. I loved media. I loved Premiere. I loved Movie Line. I love a lot of that stuff that was being published. But it was all being published with cooperation with the studios because it had to be. Everything was timed to the studio's needs. Everything was oriented around release. Everything was stage managed pretty heavily. There were good writers doing good work, and I'm not denigrating guys like Glenn Kenny who came out of that early Premiere. I think there was a lot of good. There's a reason I was addicted to all those magazines. Yep. But it was all very carefully stage managed with the studios, and it had to be. We were the response to that, which was the most punk rock version of, no, not only do we not deal with the studios, but fuck the studios. We're never going to deal with you. We're just going to write what we write. And if you don't like it, I don't care because I don't work for you. And it was absolutely one of the things that attracted people to it. And there's a lot of filmmakers I talk to now. I just had this experience the other day where I met a filmmaker for the first time and was talking to them. And midway through the conversation, it all came around and they were like, wait, where did you write? And I said, Ain't It Cool? And they're like, wait, who were you? And then they flipped out. They had the moment of what? And I forget that there were people in middle school reading us who that is now still bouncing around in that ethos of the studios and the artists have a combative thing. And we've gotten back to a place where the media landscape now feels exactly like it did pre Ain't It Cool.
That is the truth. But it was with the exception that, what was so exciting for me also about it was that in those days, say this all the time, if you had opinions about movie, the film critics were people who had climbed to the top of the ladder of established newspapers or magazines. And often it was the city desk guy who just at the end of a long career, he loved movies, so they made him the film critic. Or sometimes it was someone from a background of film, but just as often not. And if you weren't one of those people who were in your 50s or 60s and had climbed to the top of the media, and you had an opinion about movies, you could tell your friends what you thought.
Yeah.
You could type it up and go Xerox it and hand it out on the street or something if you wanted. If you're really industrious like I was, you could make a zine and pass those around. But that was it. And film conversation was a conversation between those members of the establishment at the top of it. And just to read a site like Ain't It Cool, where it was people that I recognized as sort of film fans like me, just talking about movies and arguing about them. It was so exciting. There was nothing like that.
It was, and we definitely were not accepted by those people you were talking about. I remember my first Show West I went to, which was like the first real press event I went to.
And Show West, I'll say, was the predecessor of what we now know as CinemaCon.
Yeah. It was the big Vegas convention where they talk about all the films coming out for the next year. And the studios would bring their slates and lots of movie stars. And we had never really done any press events. And so the press director for Show West reached out to us and was like, would you like to come to Show West? And Harry couldn't go, so I went. And it was pretty wild because I had the Show West guy completely on my side. He wanted me there. He wanted me to have access to everything. He gave me a badge. They got me into every room. Every other person I met there, every press person, every film, they were all like, wait, who are you? What are you from? Oh, you're that guy. And there was a lot of that, a lot of angry indignation that year. There are people who still dislike me from that first encounter just because I represented something that really upset them on some deep fundamental level. And a lot of it was because I was not on a leash. And it would make them crazy. David Poland was a great example of that. It made him insane that whatever rules he set down, I just didn't give a shit about. And he would tell me over and over, well, these are the rules. And I'd be like, no, those are your rules. I'm not working for you, and I'm not working for a legacy media. I'm not doing that. And it was such an argument for so long. And, for him, it was all about, well, you're doing this, you're breaking this, you're breaking this mores. And it all came back to, at the heart of it, why can't I do that? Why are you getting away with it? Why can you do that and I can't? And my point was always, you can. You just have to live with the consequences. If you're willing to put your name on something and you're willing to say these things as unfiltered as possible, and you are willing to take whatever's on the other side of that, advertising-wise or sponsor-wise or studio-wise, you can say the same things. Just realize we don't deal with the studios. That's why we can say this, because we don't want anything from them. When that started to change, when the studios started to court us, it was the end of the game. It really was, because I truly think at that point, you do start to accept control. At a certain point, the Chris Pulus of the world had to step aside. And the next generation of publicists coming up really had the idea, we got to figure out how to talk to them. We've got to figure out how to get them into the system, because we can't beat them. We can't keep them out completely. I can't tell you how many times I had filmmakers call me and just say, please stop covering me. Please stop scooping me. Please stop saying everything I'm going to do 8 months before I do it. Please stop. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you get into my things. I don't know how you're in my inbox. Please stop. And publicists became the middleman on that, where it was, well, what if we brought you in and then we worked with you? And at first it was, well, I don't know how that would work. And they had to really kind of rethink their whole system. All of the early set visits, if you look at the first 5 or 6 years of set visits we did, they're all individual set visits. They are all We went somewhere, we embedded on a set, we stayed there for a while, we wrote whatever we wrote.
And more or less, you could walk around the set and you could talk to somebody.
100%. And I feel like what they were doing was kind of test driving the process that now exists, where you take 30 journalists to a film set and it's a theme park tour. You have everything set up. You have rooms where all the props are, rooms where all the art are, rooms where all the stars will sit and talk to you for 5 minutes. The director's going to give you this period of time, blah, blah, blah. It's very mechanical now.
If you wander away from the gaggle and start chatting with somebody, like the hand of God will come down upon you and smite you on where you stand.
And so it is very stage controlled again. It is back to, this is what we're going to show you. We're going to put these blinders on you. This is exactly what you get to see and experience. And then you write the story that we fed you. And I don't begrudge anybody that. Like, that's the system. There's a lot of reporters working now who have never known any other way of doing things, who never realized that's a thing that became sort of codified over time. And I knew it was over as soon as they started inviting other people to those set visits, because it's not personal anymore. The filmmaker won't open up to you. The filmmaker can't give you the same kind of time. You can't disappear into the background the same way.
The filmmaker's been coached at what is the message of this conversation? Yeah. What are the themes that you have to get out?
All my best stuff was stuff that we did before publicists got involved, or where it was just one publicist and one of us. And like, those early days were a real learning process for us and for the studios. And the studios were watching very carefully to see what kind of coverage we did, what kind of response there was, and really thinking about what is it worth to open the door to all of this kind of press. And yeah, the moment they did, it was like, oh, okay, so now we're the system. We are no longer outside the system. We are the system now. And we've created a pipeline that other people are following into this.
So I want to talk to you now about your journey with a little movie called Titanic. I think the impact of what happened with you guys in this is really important for a lot of reasons. But tell me how that movie came to your attention.
One of the very first things I remember when Harry and I were first talking and I was first kind of flirting with working for the site, one of the early ways that we were kind of sizing each other up was, well, these are the secrets I know. These are the secrets you know. How much do you know? How much do I know? And we were kind of comparing things. And he said, oh, I have something that I'm going to send you. And he sent me a scriptment, which, if you've never read one, scriptments are somewhere between a treatment and a screenplay. They tend to be a little longer than an outline, but not a full-length screenplay. So he sent me like a 65-page scriptment for a film that was going to be in development, but it was also technologically maybe not possible yet. And so we don't know if it's going to happen, but we know it maybe is happening. There's some test footage going on. And it was Avatar. And this was 96, 97. So this was the earliest written record of Avatar. And I remember talking about it with him. And he had a great source inside the Cameron camp. And Cameron didn't know about it. So I remember thinking, oh my God, he really does have amazing access, because this thing is under lock and key and there's like 5 copies of it. So somebody next to James Cameron is feeding him this stuff. So Avatar, they decide they can't do it. They start working on Titanic. We're getting tons of stuff about Titanic. All during production, we're getting stories about Titanic. As the mainstream press keeps writing the story about how it's a disaster, it's a disaster, it's a disaster, it's going to be the worst thing ever made. James Cameron's going to lose all the money for Fox and Paramount at the same time. Oh my God, it's going to take 2 studios down. This is insane. How is he doing this? Why is anybody letting him do this?
As much as journalism was contained, the one exception was kind of going back to Heaven's Gate, was that there was always sort of this disaster in progress.
Anytime there's blood in the water, that's when the gloves are off. Now we can write whatever we want.
They'd all just pile on. Every year there was always something that you were watching like, oh my God, here comes Waterworld.
I remember the Waterworld coverage, all of the Breathless Waterworld coverage. It's fish tar. It's Kevin's Gate. Oh my gosh.
And you would hear it rained on the set. They lost another day of shooting yesterday. It's like they're now 37 days behind.
And I knew that because when I moved to town, Terminator 2 was shooting. And I heard all the Terminator 2 stories, and I heard all the Abyss stories. I knew that James Cameron's productions were legendarily chaotic. He was a taskmaster. It would feel like disorganized madness until the last moment, and then somehow he'd make a great movie. And so I had watched that whole process go on with Terminator 2. I had met a lot of people working on that and heard insane stories. I still remember the crew shirt that all said T3, not with me. And then the back was just all the shit Cameron had said to people on the set that made them crazy. Like, don't give me what I ask for, give me what I want. Stuff like that. It was amazing. They hated him. And so, like, all the Titanic stories, I felt like it was the same thing. Oh, they're telling all the same stories. It's chaos. It's whatever. But I'm not going to bet against him. I just think that's insane. Like, this guy, time and time again, makes the most expensive movie of all time, and they're good. I'm gonna wait. And so we basically did not play the Titanic's a disaster game early. We covered what we knew. We wrote about the script. We wrote about the things that we kind of had a handle on, and then we just waited.
The coverage was so bad on Titanic that, like, this was going to be the greatest flop Hollywood ever seen, that Fox essentially sold half the movie to Paramount.
Oh, yeah. Panic was all over this thing. When we got word that they were going to test screen, it wasn't happening in LA. It was going to happen in Minneapolis at the Mall of America. And it was going to be completely secret. They were going to test it under the title Great Expectations, because that was also coming out at Christmas. And they weren't going to tell anybody what it was till they were in the theater. Then they would have to sign a giant NDA. And this was it. This was the one test screening Cameron was going to get because of timing. So we not only knew what was going to happen, we put up a thing on the site and said, Titanic showing tonight. Go. Here's where you get a pass. Go. It's Titanic. Don't listen to them. We had hundreds of people show up, and they crammed that test screening with our people. So as soon as the screening was over, we got maybe 100 responses, people writing reviews saying this is what they saw, and every one of them was, dude, it's amazing. It's amazing. You have no idea how great this is. Unfinished, with the digital effects not done. This is amazing. So we ran that. And we ran, 40 reviews that night, something like that. And on a dime, that buzz turned around. The next day, the whole town was like, wait, did it work? Is it going to work? It changed everything. And that was the moment, because Cameron contacted us, Fox contacted, everybody contacted us. How did you know that? Of course, we're not going to tell you how, but we did. We pulled the magic trick off. Now what? Now you've got good buzz. Now what are you going to do? And it did. It shifted the way the rest of the media was covering the movie. They had no choice but to respond to that many overwhelmingly positive reactions that night. And it was a real case of a studio not knowing what to do with us. Were they mad at us? Were they not mad at us? Were they angry at the buzz? Were they happy that they got they couldn't figure it out. It was infuriating to them because they had no control over it. And I think that's when they realized, we don't own this. We can't manage this. It's just going to happen. It is what it is. Like, I'm glad they liked it. But if that night had been a disaster for them, we would have run that too. And that might have been the end of Titanic. It was a huge turning point, and it was a huge turning point in terms of how people viewed the site.
You've quoted something you heard from Rupert Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch famously said to Tom Rothman, if the fortunes of my company and a $500 million investment ever fall to the opinion of a bunch of fat kids in Texas again, you're fucking fired. And yeah, I understand why we were a real burr in the saddle for these people. Like, it truly was out of their hands. And I think that was an experience none of them had ever had before.
The flop of the year genre of press coverage died right at that moment. Like, that never appeared again.
It's been much harder to run a narrative the entire time something is in production. I mean, we still hear about things that are, in trouble or whatever, but I feel like there is so much back and forth now with the audience that you really never have a chance for the buzz to get that horrible in a vacuum anymore. There's always somebody who's willing to step in and stage manage it and kind of control it and fight it and push back. And, the big story that we saw break over the last week about Blake Lively and Justin Baldacci, I think really speaks to just how much muscle studios will now employ to try to take control of a narrative or shape a narrative, whole cloth, and how there are, on some of these films, there are 3 or 4 different camps pushing narratives now. And we've all learned now how to game the internet and try to game the internet. And it's interesting watching people try to push different narratives out now.
What I think was significant also about the Titanic thing is that the narrative used to be it would start with the poster, and then there'd be the trailer, then there'd be teaser trailer, then there'd be trailer A, then there'd be trailer B. That was the campaign, essentially. That was it. And now it is a campaign that begins with the first announcement that this movie is going to happen, and then announcements of casting, and announcement, with Superman. Last week, we saw the 45-second teaser trailer.
Trailers for trailers give me just adjectives. I can't even.
I love the thing where they have the stars come on and introduce the trailers beforehand. It's
like one of my least favorite things in the world is the trailer that starts with a 4-second version of the trailer, and it says, "The trailer starts now." Don't show me those clips literally 10 seconds before you just show me the trailer. Like, I find that infuriating now.
The campaign for a movie has to start engaging with the audience, engaging with the fans, engaging with everybody from the first announcement of the film.
And again, part of that is something that we really pushed as an idea, which was, I've always loved when you go to Disneyland or Disney World and you get in line for a ride and you're going to be in line for 45 minutes or an hour. And so the entire line has little things hidden in it, and like the Haunted Mansion is the best example, walking by the gravestones with the jokes on them and walking by windows that do things, and everything in the line is part of that experience to try and get you into it. Pirates of the Caribbean is a great example of that. The whole way through, you're getting more and more into the world of the pirates before you finally get on your boat. So you have almost an hour of experience before you're even having the experience. I feel like the whole world is a Disney ride now, and every movie is sold that way. From the moment you line up, they want you engaging with it. And yeah, they'll use star announcements, they'll use this, they'll use that. And the set visit has become a big part of that. One of the reasons towards the end of Hit Fix, I was burning out. And part of it was feeling like I was working the Hype Olympics, where it's the only way to break through or make any noise now is to be the most hyperbolic about. So it's the best trailer of all time. It's this, it's that. When 9,000 outlets are running the same thing at the same time, the only way you can really make any noise is by becoming more hyperbolic or louder. And so you get everybody now selling the hype more than anything else. And by the time a movie comes out, it feels like it is already done and digested. So the release is almost a perfunctory afterthought to all of the marketing and the hype. And then it's on to the next thing. And the actual release seems inconsequential, like the thing that matters the least in a film's life cycle at this point, which is so backwards. But absolutely, we helped build that. And, we asked for it and we got it. And now I wish it would go away.
Well, but another thing you helped build in the 90s was the Sundance movement, this explosion of indie filmmaking that partially could happen because there was this world, this fan community online ready to embrace and get excited about and hype these films in a way that, unless they got a studio release or a Harvey Weinstein handling would have not happened before.
That was honestly the most gratifying thing, was finding little films and getting behind them. Again, they never do this stuff now, but there was a point between like 99 and I'd say 2004 where if a studio had a problem movie, they would call us to come in and they would show it to us and they'd say, "What do you think?" And sometimes you could tell they literally didn't know. Like, I just don't know what this is. Do you like it? Can we do anything with it? And I think the first one of those that I really remember making a difference on was Pitch Black, which USA Films had produced, and Focus kind of had a handle on it. It was going to land somewhere in that ecosystem, and they weren't sure what to do with it. And they were considering maybe just dumping it to video. And I remember they showed it to us, and then we asked them to let us have it for Button-a-thon. And we showed it at, which was a 24-hour film festival we do once a year, where it was old films, new films, stuff that isn't out yet. Nobody knew what was going to show. You would just come and whatever happened to you for 24 hours happened. And on the first year we did it, we programmed Pitch Black, and we programmed it at like 2 a.m. And when we showed it, we said, "You don't know this director really? You don't know this lead actor? You know nothing about this. We thought it was awesome. We think you're going to think it's awesome. Here we go." We showed Pitch Black, ripped the roof off the place. And then at the end, at like 4 a.m, Vin Diesel walks out, who at that point, they only knew as the voice of the Iron Giant. He was nobody yet. And he walks out and worked that crowd for like an hour and a half afterwards, stood in the lobby, signed autographs, talked to people, took pictures, was so happy that Pitch Black had shown and that there had been that kind of reaction to it, that he was like, whatever you need from me. And for years after that, anytime I ran into Vin, he would just walk up to me and go, Pitch Black. Because he just was so grateful. And I think it was a real turning point for his career and for David Twohy's. But there were movies like that, little movies, that I feel like we helped salvage or we helped get attention. And for all the guilt I have about some of the larger things that Ain't It Cool created or perpetuated, there's so many little films and little filmmakers who would not have gotten a shake if we had not gotten behind them, that I feel like it balances out. My karma balances out somewhere in the middle.
And the entire notion that filmmakers could find that response beyond the studios, which would still today give so many hope, I think came out of what you guys did in this whole era.
Sure.
What advice would you give to young Drew, or a young Drew today, driving from Florida to Hollywood, the dream to go into the industry?
I would say be honest and unsparing with your opinion to the people who would like you to be honest and unsparing with them. The rest of the time, keep it in your pants. If you want to work in this business, people have incredibly long memories, good and bad. And, you know, I work from a place of pretty firm positivity at this point. I write about what I want to write about. I want to write about the things I like. So I rarely write negative reviews anymore. I rarely write new reviews anymore. You know, a lot of my work is archival. I like writing about older movies. I like writing pieces about film history. And I think a lot of that is the politics did me no favors. And I would say, if you want to write about movies, if you really want to do what I've done for the last 30 years, make that your goal. Don't try to work both sides of the fence. If you really want to write about movies passionately and on a broad spectrum, do that. Make that your goal. If you want to make movies, don't write about movies. Don't do both. Pick a lane. And honestly, I don't know what lane I would have picked, Richard. I do feel like when I run into a filmmaker and they say, I've been reading you since middle school, and so much of what I think about film, you helped get me there. You helped me think critically about movies. You helped me realize that my tastes were good, or that I, am allowed to like the things I like as long as I can say why I liked it. When I hear that, I feel like, okay, maybe this is what I was supposed to do. Maybe the filmmaking was, what I wanted to do. But I've really had an impact. I've really influenced filmmakers, and I've influenced what films have gotten made. And I've made some kind of a mark on this business that I truly think at the end I can be happy about.
And I would say, as a writer, you can't question that. It is a very rare thing for a writer, especially a young writer, to find their work resonating with people, moving with people, and touching people. And if that happens, then that's the miracle. You got it.
I should have enjoyed that part of it more and seen it less as a sideline to the thing that I was really doing. When the truth is, this is what I've really been doing for 30 years and what I am doing still. I am working on other stuff, and I am happy to be still working in the business. I have made real peace with the fact that the thing that I will leave behind is this body of work about movies. And hopefully a few of these projects that I'm working on now will actually finish. And then I will have this thing that I can point at and say, look, the websites were what they were. They were of their moment. They are very transitory things. But there are things that I have written and built now that I really love, that are permanent, that I will leave as a body of work that is informed and hopefully educational and entertaining.
Final question now. If you are programming a 3-film festival of the 1990s that you can force everyone who works in Hollywood to watch, what are the 3 films?
Terminator 2. I think it is technologically the flashpoint for everything that has happened since. Even more than Jurassic Park, I think T2 is the moment where everybody working in town went, oh, we can do that now. Okay, gotcha. My brain's going to have to get bigger because I didn't know we could do that. And on top of it, it's still a great human movie. It is a tech flashpoint that remains a beautifully affecting, really well-made movie. JFK, because there are no movies like that anymore. There was a point where Hollywood, where Warner Brothers was like, yeah, we're going to give Oliver Stone $65 million to go make a movie about the JFK conspiracy, where he's not going to solve it.
Yeah.
He's just going to show you that it's crazy and there's no answer to it. And it's going to star America's favorite person, America's new dad, Kevin Costner.
The biggest star of the time.
Is going to play that crazy son of a bitch, Jim Garrison, and he's going to make you believe it. That movie, the fact that it's as political it is, the fact that it's as angry as it is, the fact that it is 3 hours of people talking, the biggest set piece in the movie is Donald Sutherland on a bench explaining shit to you for 20 minutes. It's unbelievable that that was ever a real movie, but it was, and it was a massive hit and a Oscar nominee. Like, that's a different era. There are no movies like that now. And I can't imagine Hollywood ever really going back to that. And then I'd have to pick something from 99, and I don't know what, but you have to pick something from that year that kind of sums up, I don't know if it's Fincher and Fight Club. I don't know if it's Jones and Being John Malkovich, but 99 was the year that all of the indie energy and all of the studio energy of that decade landed in the same place. So you got these studio movies from indie darlings that all felt like, how did any studio say yes to this? Much less, how did a studio say yes to this whole year of stuff? How did any studio say yes to this? I think that year was the year that, to me, felt like the culmination of everything that had been happening for a decade. And then we never really did it again. 99 was the graduation point, the flashpoint, and then that's kind of the end of that revolutionary moment. Yeah, all of those filmmakers keep working. But I don't know there's ever been a year again where it felt like so many people got away with so much and got it released on such a giant level.
It is funny. It's like the last Apollo mission that when it ended, you thought like, okay,
yeah,
now we're going to Mars and we're going to be going to the moon every week and we're going to be.
Yeah, you're going to get fight clubs all the time. No, sir. No, you are not.
Drew McQueenie, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Richard. A real pleasure.
It was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that was terrific. It was so good to chat with my old friend Drew. I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's really fascinating to hear these stories of the moment when the internet dawned on an unsuspecting Hollywood, and Drew was one of the seminal figures in that moment. And I'm so glad he shared his story with us. You can find the links to follow Drew on his Substack and his podcast on our website and on the page for this. Please follow him, and please join us for more thrilling tales of Hollywood in the 90s coming next week. Take care.